And what is up, everybody? You know, nowadays when it comes to video games, like especially, people try to go back to the classics and try to introduce some more classic stuff. Everything's so retro to where they got this third party hardware that can play NES, Sega Genesis, and Super Nintendo games all at once. And then even for Sega to come out with the Genesis Classic to with a bunch of different games for Sega, but then Nintendo came out with the NES Classic. Problem was they didn't put enough NES titles in it. They had a bunch of other intellectual properties as well, but because it was made famous during that time. That's what they did. At least with at play, the people that made the Genesis emulator, at least they installed a means of being able to play other licensed Sega Genesis games, and Nintendo didn't do that. They're not even trying to do that. Then, of course, PlayStation comes out with their own, mini emulator. It had Final Fantasy VII, which is not, which is not Sony's intellectual property. Sony doesn't have any intellectual properties. Nintendo does, Sega does. Sony doesn't have any. They just have They might have exclusives, but that doesn't make it. That doesn't make it the intellectual property of Sony. And it's very just like the Castlevania and Mega Man were exclusively to NES, despite the fact that the Sega Master System was out. Mega Man and Castlevania were not Nintendo's intellectual properties. Ninja Gaiden was not Nintendo's intellectual property, but they were exclusively but those games were exclusively for the NES. Is basically what I'm saying as far as Sony goes, and even their Smash Brothers knockoff title. I forget what it's called, like PlayStation All Stars or something like that. None of those characters are the intellectual property of Sony. It's just that those games were made exclusively for Sony, for the PlayStation. And even for the Super Nintendo Classic, I found it interesting that they had Street Fighter Two, particularly Street Fighter. I believe it was Super Street Fighter Two Turbo, the new challengers. Uh, my issue with that is the fact that, well, so many other classic Nintendo titles. I mean, particularly Nintendo's intellectual properties at the time, that could have easily passed for them to do something like that uh, with a Capcom property. I mean, Mortal Kombat came out with a plug and play emulator as well. Completely understandable, but one of the first people to really do it was Neo Geo SNK, right? They had the Neo Geo X, which was basically a handheld um, uh, console, a portable console, but kind of like the Nintendo Switch. You plug it into the charger that looked like the classic Neo Geo console. Plug it into that, and with that, you could plug that into your high definition television and be able to play as if it was, the old Neo Geo. And then it came with the SD card with, I forget, like, I think it was maybe 40 games on it, some of their classics, and then an extra SD card coming with a game that was never released within the United States. So it was cool to see that. But they were supposed to bring back more titles similar to that, and that never happened. it kind of harkens me to the year 2000. So this was 20 years ago, and Neo Geo came out with the Neo Geo the Neo Geo Pocket Color. And for those of you who were completely unfamiliar with it, this is what just gonna watch a little bit of the gameplay here. You got Ryu versus Dan, and everybody's a chibi, kind of like Street Fighter, just like Street Fighter 2 for the Game Boy. Everybody's a chibi. Only difference is, I don't think that the graphics might have been just as good as the Game Boy Pocket or Game Boy Pocket Color. Graphics might not have been as good, but the gameplay, the playability overall was definitely superior. Problem was piss poor timing on SNK's part, because when they released this, Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance, and it was like, well, finally, at least like they said it was 32-bit, but it was kind of like the 32-bit capability that Super Nintendo had, but in a tight handheld console. Okay, fine, whatever. And unfortunately, Neo Geo Pocket got blown out the box, and those games you can only get on an emulator, on software emulator on your Androids. There's nowhere, there's no nobody's trying to make any third-party content for that. And then on top of that, SNK isn't trying to put out anything, for the sole purpose of playing that, which is sad. However, they did come out with something new, the Neo Geo Mini. Now, this is actually, I think this came out last year. Probably came out last year. Still pretty expensive to get. It's ridiculous, and it looks, they try to make it look like a tiny little arcade cabinet, which there's a lot of retro style games that they're releasing like this, which isn't that big a deal. But then they got 40 different titles here, and some of their Metal Slugs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as well as Metal Slug X, King of Fighters, King of the Monsters 1 and 2, Mutation Nation, which was a beat 'em up that they left out from the Neo Geo X, Sengoku 3, which was far superior than the first two Sengokus, but they didn't put that on the Neo Geo X. What else? They got Samurai Showdowns 2, 4, and 5, Last Blade 2, Garo Mark of the Wolves, which was probably the best 2D fighter that SNK had come out with, because even the Fighters Generation, despite the fact that they just hounded and just absolutely hated on any and every 2D fighter made by SNK, that was Garo Mark of the Wolves was the only one that they said was on par with Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which was Capcom's best 2D fighter. And personally, I disagree, because I've always been a bigger SNK fan. I've always given Capcom its respect, but I've always been a bigger SNK fan. Real Bout Fatal Fury. I would have preferred Real Bout Fatal Fury Special, but that was a title that they didn't have that particular time. Blues Journey is basically SNK's answer to Super Mario Brothers. Very, very fun. A bunch of different titles here. King of Fighters 95, 97, 98, 2000, 2002. I don't know why they bothered with Art of Fighting, which was one of my least favorites that they had. Fatal Fury Special. At that, I don't think they should have had that. They should have had other titles. And then of course Ninja Masters, which was one of the ones that they introduced, the Neo Geo X, because it was never released in the U.S. and now they got it here. And there's so many other different game here. Shock Troopers, Cross Swords. That game is useless. 3 Count Bout sucks. Magician Lord is a classic, but like damn near impossible to beat. Blazing Star, top view shooter, golf game, Super Sidekicks. I would have preferred Super Sidekicks too. That one was more fun. Kizuna Encounter, which is the tag team system of Savage Reign. Savage Reign they left out, but at least they have this, which includes all the characters from Savage Reign. And I'm basically mentioning this for people who are familiar with the old SNK games, and they show you all the different titles. And what I don't like is the fact that this comes with just the machine. Doesn't come with any cables. The only cable it comes with is the power source. Is the power supply. That's it. And it doesn't even have the means of actually plugging it in. It's just a cable attached. It's basically a USB cable. It's a micro. It's the new universal micro USB cable, and not even a 2-prong plug to go into the wall. Just the USB cable at the end. Basically, they're like, well, okay, here's how here's the power source, but try to find it. Try to turn it on your damn self. And as much fun as this is to have, and as often as I play this, I've wondered to myself, why hasn't Capcom done anything like this? It's ridiculous. I mean, it's really ridiculous considering all the titles, all the different, 2D fighting games as well as arcade beat 'em ups that Capcom had come out with. How come they haven't released something like this? Quick plug and play, third party, means of being able to play some of these classics. I mean, some of these games, some of these games here, you could find on PlayStation or Xbox, in their Play stores, but to have external hardware like this, quick plug and play. Imagine if you had that for the Dungeons and Dragons hack and slash beat 'em up done by Capcom, or the Punisher beat 'em up done by Capcom, or Star Gladiator, aka Plasma Sword. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be any of their mega titles. Hell, Final Fight 3. I don't see anybody trying to play that. It's always Final Fight 1. They always put that up on the different either Nintendo Play, the Nintendo Store, PlayStation Store, Xbox Store. All those places, they only got Final Fight 1. But what about 2 and 3? 3 was far superior. They don't have a Final Fight guy for Super Nintendo, thankfully, because the Final Fight for Super Nintendo was not cooperative play, which was it was wrong that they did. It was wrong that they did that, and it was very wrong that they left out the only Japanese character. So that was That was very racist. but then again, it was like that in Japan. It was like that in Japan as it was in the United States. But some like I don't know, like what is it? Dynasty Warriors, Knights of the Round, just some and you know Darkstalkers obviously, and then of course you got all the Street Fighter titles and everything like that. And it doesn't have to. You don't have to focus on the more popular stuff. I mean, hell, ghouls. Do Ghosts and Goblins and Ghouls and Ghosts again. Bionic Commando again. I mean, they had a Capcom Captain Commando. They had a Capcom Classics library, volumes 1 and 2 for the PlayStation 2. I remember that. I had both of them. I also had a Classics library for SNK. And that left out, almost, a lot of the titles that were here, including, like I said, Sengoku 3, which was probably one of their best beat 'em ups. SNK, which was also known for a lot of beat 'em ups. And then, of course, they left out Rage of the Dragons, or the Double Dragon movie 2D fighter. The game was a hell of a lot better than the movie. The game looked absolutely nothing like the movie, with the exception of a Bobo. But it was still surprisingly a good game. Nobody's trying to do stuff like that. Capcom, for them to come, if they were to come out with, Capcom could easily come out with something like this. Even just a quick plug and play arcade joystick with maybe not all their titles, but they could easily come up with 20. Easily come up with 20 different classic titles of theirs, going back, from Sun to Avenger, 1942, and I guess you can't do it. You can't do it without Street Fighter, I guess. Have a couple of the Street Fighter titles, Street Fighter 1, maybe Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the new challengers, just to make sure everybody's included, and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, again to make sure that everybody's included. You don't need the Marvel versus Capcom titles. Red Earth was a title that was never introduced to the United States. Several different games, several different intellectual properties that they had that they need to make. They need to make this little emulator hardware just for the sole purpose of quick plug and play, and that way it kind of gives you the nostalgia feeling of what back in the day with the whole spirit of the arcade that has been murdered since the invention of online play. Nobody's going out to the arcade anymore. And that's why when you do go to arcade, when you do hit up an arcade that just so happens to have certain game titles are set together, a majority of them aren't like the games that we had. Here. Not to mention, it cost you an arm and a leg and the soul of your firstborn child to play these games anymore. So for Capcom to just please, look, the Capcom Cup, it's dumb that you only use the Capcom Cup with Street Fighter titles. In Street Fighter 5, not your best work. Street Fighter 4 was so much better than Street Fighter 5. And the fact that you're adapting NetherRealm's storytelling to your gameplay, as opposed to having each character have its own individual story and just play through the game like that, you're losing what made you. You're losing what it is that brought you to the dance. I mean, NetherRealm. The only reason why they did that was to basically try to justify Mortal Kombat versus the DC Universe. That was the first time that their story, that particular type of storytelling within a fighting game took place. They needed to do that because there was no justification for having these two different universes come together. Not to mention the fact that the gameplay was absolutely horrible. The story on both sides was incredible. Incredible story. Horrible gameplay. And then they brought it with them to Mortal Kombat 9, then Mortal Kombat X, and I don't know what the hell they're doing with Mortal Kombat 11 due to the fact that you got. It's why do Scorpion and Sub-Zero look Samoan? They don't even look Asian. One's Chinese, one's Japanese, and they don't even look Oriental. What the hell sense does that make? And then and then all the extra profanity and everything that they just feel the need to add. And so much woke culture, this, that, yeah. I genuinely don't care anymore. And the fact that I'm no longer buying anything NetherRealm again until they finish making the game. That's what I did with Injustice 2. It wasn't until they released the Ultimate Edition that I finally bought that game, because I wasn't gonna buy it to then have to keep paying almost just as much money as when I bought the game to keep getting new characters and new levels and skins or costumes or whatever. Basically, what I'm doing now, what I was doing with Mortal Kombat X, only to find out that now here's Mortal Kombat XL, and they introduce 4 new characters that I genuinely couldn't care about. You got so Capcom started doing the same thing, especially with Street Fighter 4. Not so much with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. I liked that game. I don't know what everybody's problem with that game was. I had a very good time playing it. Very good, very fun time beating it. I just wish that the characters had their own individual story endings. Just like in Marvel, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 or the first Marvel vs. Capcom. They don't want, for whatever reason, they don't want to do that anymore. And even Capcom's crossovers with either SNK or Namco, for whatever reason, the better crossover events were always done by the other companies. They were never done properly by Capcom. At least that's what everybody, that's what everybody's complaining about. Match of the Millennium was great, but it was just for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. But then everybody hated Capcom versus SNK, and everybody hated Capcom versus SNK too. I don't know what the problem was. I love both of them, but they felt like a lot of the characters, especially on the SNK side, were dumbed down to accommodate for the Capcom characters. Which in the first game, it was basically Street Fighter 2 versus King of Fighters. It was not truly SNK versus it wasn't truly SNK versus Capcom. You got a bit more of a feel of it from the second game, introducing Samurai Showdown characters, as well as Rock Howard from Garou Mark of the Wolves, who at the time was not in a King of Fighters title. But it was still just Street Fighter. It was still basically just Street Fighter 2, or at least Street Fighter Alpha, that was put into that predicament. It's ridiculous. It was just absolutely ridiculous that they do that. But then of course SVC Chaos, which everybody seemed to love, but that doesn't seem to get the respect. It truly deserved as a title. And my issue with that game was the fact that, for what I don't know why, as many times as I've played it, I cannot beat the first whoever the first person they put in front of me is. I can't beat them. I don't know what It's like of all the arcade games that I've played throughout my lifetime, being able to at least get through the first character, and then that's like a staple. And for whatever reason, I can't do it with SVC Chaos. I don't know what happened. Leave out the crossover titles, right? Leave out the crossovers with Marvel, X-Men versus Street Fighter, Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter, Marvel versus Capcom. Leave those out, or maybe just put in Marvel versus Capcom 2. Have Dynasty Warriors. Have Final Fight 3. Have um Red Earth, and any other Capcom 2D fighter that I can't seem to put a finger on right now, aside from Darkstalkers, but also include Darkstalkers, or at least the expansion of the third one, which included Donovan, which you know which was only available if you got it for the PlayStation as opposed to the arcade. Or just use the arcade, because unfortunately, as cool a character as Donovan was, he was pretty weak. He was a shockingly weak, very bad character, despite how absolutely badass he looked. I made it a point, with my artwork, to actually try to make a figure of him, and I did, and it came out great. It was just unfortunately, like I said, he was just a horrible, horrible character to play as, despite how absolutely cool he looked, his backstory and everything like that. And then, of course, his ending is his ending. It's just a tragedy. It truly is, and to include him in the third game is like, yeah, I guess it kind of wasn't necessary, but at the same time, it's like, for whatever reason, everybody loved him. And what else? Just so many different Capcom titles. So many different Capcom titles you could easily throw together in some little third party hardware like this, and in a third party hardware emulator, quick plug and play. 20 games easy. 20 different titles easy. They don't even need to be any of the 3D modeled games, like a Plasma Sword, or even Street Fighter EX, which I don't know why people hated Street Fighter EX. I love those games. I don't know what the problem is. And it's sad, because that whole expansion of the universe introduced a bunch of new characters that nobody seems to want to talk about. And even in the new realm of 3D Street Fighter games like Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, they're not even trying to bring those characters back. It's sad. It's really sad. But if PlayStation could come out with a third party hardware that's got several different titles, and a majority of them are all 3D modeled, there's no reason as to why Capcom can't possibly do the same, especially with rival schools, Project Justice. I want to say the possibilities are endless, but even that is asking a bit too much from Capcom. I mean, considering their track record lately, but certain things like that, it just makes all the sense in the world for them to do something like this. For whatever reason, they're just sitting on their hands. I'm done talking. You guys have a good night.